I'm here at the Canada Strong and Free Network Conference with the leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec, Eric Duhaime. We've talked to Eric several times before the Quebec election, but we are yet to catch up with him. So today I have the pleasure of doing that. Eric, I do have to ask, since the election, we're now in March, how are you doing? How is the party doing?
We're doing very well, actually. As you know, the party went from 1% to 13% in the last election on October 3rd. It's the largest increase of a political party in Quebec's history. Like, a party never went from 0 to 13 in one shot. We did it, and we're very proud of it. Unfortunately, it didn't translate into seats. It was a five-way race. We lost the closest race of them all. We lost them, unfortunately, in the Quebec City region. But so we're happy of the votes we got. We got 530,000 Quebecers voting Conservative provincially, but we don't have seats. So we have to make sure that we keep going on that momentum to increase the pressure that we're putting on the government and make sure we're visible within the next 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. And that was an incredible gain, and to see a lot of Quebecers who maybe would have never identified themselves as Conservatives before. I do have to ask, this week, Legault put out the budget. What do you make of his budget?
Well, there's positive things, actually. He's decreasing income taxes by 1%. We were proposing 2%, but we're taking credit a little bit of it, because if we hadn't been there in the election campaign, he wouldn't have promised to cut taxes like he did. He's talking now in favor of 2 private hospitals in Quebec, because we've been pushing to make sure that we add the contribution of the private sector in healthcare. But that being said, unfortunately, Mr. Legault is only copying parts of our program, not the total program, and he's not cutting the spending of Quebec State, and he's increasing it more than the growth of our economy. And what he's doing is that he's pushing more debt on the back of the young generation, and that's what scares us off, actually. So he's funding his tax cuts by the wrong way. On the other side also, he's a statist. I mean, healthcare spending, for example, is going to go up by 7.7% this year, which is unsustainable in the long run. So we're still pushing. We see the impact we're having, but we need to also make sure that we get the message out that Legault is going halfway of what needs to be done.
Right. There was a debate at the start of the new National Assembly session with the allegiance to the king, with the Parti Québécois not wanting to make that allegiance. It was now made optional. Where does the Conservative Party, which, the Conservative parties federally and in other provinces are quite monarchist, so where do you stand on the...
I'm not a monarchist, obviously. The monarchy is not that popular in Quebec, especially not among Francophones. But that being said, it's a very symbolic thing to do. It doesn't change much in the work, and it's unfortunate that while we have huge problems with our debt, we have huge problems with our healthcare system, we have huge problems with the exploitation of our natural resources. We can't balance the books, and the top priority of many politicians in Quebec City is to talk about the Queen or the King. I think that unfortunately, we're not focusing on the right issues. So they have the right to sit even if they don't give the allegiance to the king. But that being said, I don't think it should be the number one priority.
A quick follow-up. Had you been elected, would you have given allegiance to the king?
I would have. Not because I believe in the king or the monarchy per se, but because I think it's part of the tradition and of the respect of the institutions. It's been there forever. Even the Bloc Québécois MPs here in Ottawa, they did it for years. They always did it. It's not. And does it make them less Quebecois or less separatist? Not at all. I mean, it's when you're elected, you also have to respect the rules, and I thought that was part of the rules. That's how I see it as a conservative.
Yeah, for sure. Another controversy that arrived in Quebec that was the Islamophobia special appointee. The rest of Canada was very happy to see Mrs. Amira Al-Gabwe tackle this issue. In Quebec, not so much, mostly because of her criticisms of Quebec, and it got to the point where even the left-wing Québec Solidaire party said that she should not have the job. Why do you think, unlike the rest of the Canada, Quebec was so opposed to Mrs. Al-Gabwe, even if she apologized for her comment?
Well, she's supposed to be there to fight discrimination, while herself made statements that were very discriminatory against Quebecers. So I find it very ironic that Mr. Trudeau, who's always saying that discrimination is terrible, he's nominating someone that is very controversial because she was part of the discriminatory system in Quebec, and it's a huge problem. I mean, if you don't want to be discriminated, well, don't discriminate others. And that woman, she apologized at the end of the day. She refused to apologize for a while. She ended up apologizing because she had no choice, because otherwise she would have been kicked out. But it was too little too late in my book. That woman does not deserve to have the top job that Trudeau gave her.
Right. Kind of on a similar topic, you brought up discrimination. We're seeing now in our universities, the woke universities, new forms of discrimination in the name of anti-racism, in the name of equity, diversity, and inclusion ideology, where, for example, at the University Laval,
Yep.
where they don't, certain positions for the Canada Research Chairs were for anyone except able-bodied white men. The minister, Pascal Derry, has denounced that.
She denounced it, but she did nothing. It's still going on. So she made a statement to look good among a base, a small C conservative base, but she did nothing. She had the power to stop that and to say, we're not accepting any funds if you're promoting discrimination, no matter if it's for wokeism or diversity or call it like you want. It's pure hypocrisy from the left. That's the way we need to say it, because they're saying that they want to fight discrimination by promoting discrimination. They say they want to promote freedom by depriving people from the freedom to speech or freedom to be themselves. I mean, there's something that is completely false, and I think we're not fighting back enough. We need to stop wokeism, and in Quebec, there's still a lot of resistance vis-a-vis wokeism, much more than we see in English Canada, actually.
Yeah, and a follow-up to that, why do you think that is? Because Quebecers, in many ways, are quite progressive. They're more pro-abortion, for example. They tend to favor more sexual liberty. But when it comes to woke, they're so against woke. I mean, an example I can think was at one of the debates during the election, Pierre, what's his name, the QS leader, said the name, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois said the name of Pierre Vallière's book with the N-word on television to prove he wasn't woke. Why
the
are
extreme
Quebecers...
left, he was using the N-word.
Yeah, so why do you think Quebecers are so anti-woke?
Well, because, it came from the U.S. It's not part of us. And we have to stop those English Canadians who are anti-American. And on the left, usually they're anti-American. Yeah. But it seemed that when there's something crazy south of our border, they're the first one to import it. So,
right.
And they're very American in their politics, actually, because this is not Canadian. This is American politics. And we're not Americans. And we shouldn't invite those useless debates on our campuses. And our government should make sure that, the freedom of speech is still present there, the freedom of the press, that people should be able to say what they have to say. And there's a lot of things that the Americans are doing well, but obviously it's not wokeism.
No, for sure. And you're right, like almost every single woke concept and idea comes from the U.S., specifically academia, sociology departments, and it's not compatible with Canadian values because it's an individualist type of ideology. Let's move on to you and your party. You had been fighting to have access to the National Assembly, to the press gallery in the National Assembly. How is that going? Have you been able to get in?
It's weird because the CAQ is giving us things that they're depriving us from basic things. Unfortunately, it's the biggest democratic distortion in Quebec's history. 13% of the population right now does not have the right to get within the National Assembly. We have 0 seats out of 125, even if we got 13% of the vote. The Liberals got 14% of the vote, and they have 20 members right now sitting within the National Assembly. And if you include Québec Solidaire, the Parti Québécois, and us all together, we got more votes than the CAQ, and all together we have 14 seats versus 90 for the CAQ. So it gives you an idea of the problem that we're facing in Quebec. There's a lot of people who feel that their votes were spoiled, were useless. And I think that before being a CAQ leader, Mr. Legault should be a statement, and he should acknowledge that democracy exists, and he should try to correct that instead of amplifying the problem that we're facing right now.
Just a short follow-up. Are you in support of electoral reform, or do you think
Well, we're going to have a huge debate. We have a convention coming up in the fall. We're going to have, some debates and some votes. You can't be in favor of a democratic reform by imposing it against the will of your members. We didn't discuss that. We're a new party. I've only been the leader for less than 2 years now. We had only one convention. We're gonna have another one, and it's gonna be part of our discussions, and we'll see how the members are gonna vote.
You have been trying to court some of the CAC MPs to join your
Yes,
party.
openly.
I do want to, though, challenge that a bit. The people in those ridings voted for the CAC to have a CAC MP. Don't you think it may be a bit undemocratic to try to get them to put a conservative MP when they didn't vote for that?
I find that funny that our opponents are saying that because there's 13% of Quebecers who voted conservative and we have 0% of 125 members, and that they call it democracy. If there's one single person who wants to represent 13% of the population, that MP will not represent only his constituents who voted conservative. He's going to represent 530,000 Quebecers in the National Assembly. That I find it much more democratic than the current system that we live in.
And lastly, you, of course, had this incredible rise. Despite the fact you didn't win seats, you still won a lot for a new party, going from 1 to 12%. But a lot of that was maybe
13%, sorry.
There we go. Well, that's a lot of that may have been attributed to the fact that people were very upset with the way that Legault handled the pandemic. How do you stay relevant going into the next election without that anger? And because you don't have a seat versus you at least had Claire Sanson last time that had crossed the floor, how do you get that number, maybe even more next time?
First of all, it's true. The reason why we went up is in big part because there was those lockdowns and a lot of people were furious at the government because Quebec government was one of the worst of them all in terms of managing that pandemic. That being said, the reasons why we were opposing the Legault rules on that are the same ones why we're opposing his plan on controlling the energy today, or the reasons why we're promoting the addition of private healthcare. It's because we're the promoters of individual freedom. We're against the control by the big government. And that's going to happen in all other issues. Every single day there's new issues arising, and it's always the same approach that we're having. And what made us popular last election is what's going to make us even more popular in the next election. And the advantage we're going to have in 4 years that we didn't have now is that we only had 1 year to organize, to fundraise, to prepare for the election. Now we have 4 years ahead of us. We're more well-known now than we were. We were completely unknown a year and a half ago when I took over the leadership of the party. Now more and more people know we exist. There's going to be a federal election, hopefully, in the next few months. We're hopefully going to have a new prime minister in Canada with Pierre Poilievre, and I think that's also going to boost our brand in Quebec. So for all those reasons, I'm very optimistic for the future of conservatism in Quebec.
Well, this was Eric Duhaime, leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec, live in Ottawa for True North. I'm Elie Cantin-Nantel.